my parents were both natural-born teachers. They could teach anything to anybody, and although my father was very hot-headed, he was also a very patient man. When it came down that somebody wanted something from him, he'd see that he got it. And teaching was a very demanding, frustrating situation because in that day you were a teacher 24 hours a day, and one of the great difficulties of Americans was finding any moment of privacy. It was an era when the superstitions were still very big, where the ignorance level was very high in this provincial area. For instance, when I was a little boy and I'd go walking down the streets, the women would stop me and they'd run their fingers, the pregnant women would run their fingers over my nose because they wanted a high-bridged baby. You took it for granted that that's what women were going to do to you, and you didn't holler, and you didn't scream, and you didn't run. You let them do it. There was an almost total interaction between Americans and Filipinos in the provinces because there were too few Americans to be able to support a community of any kind. And you were public figures. You belonged to the community belonged to you. There was a great sense of mutual responsibility. Even in children, little children had this feeling that I have to behave because I'm being watched. They started in the Philippines as teachers in the public schools, which were under American jurisdiction. This was an American possession and was ruled through a Philippine commission which set up a very rapidly growing school system. And at the start, it was so short of teachers that anybody who had passed the third grade could apply for a teacher's certificate and go teaching in the first or second grade. Shortly after that, the normal school was established in this country, and even before my parents had arrived, the progress had been such that the University of Philippines had already been founded, and English was gaining very rapidly as the language of the country, the language of educated people. My father had been on the track team at the University of Michigan, so he was very much in demand as a coach because athletics were part of the Americanization process, the process of bringing the Philippines out of the 17th century or the 18th century into the 20th century. So he was coaching in track and field and baseball and swimming, whatever it is you need to coach, he was it. But we lived in a town that was urban, the see of a bishop, but at the same time was right on the edge of the country, so that you had rural and urban mix. No newspaper. You depended on the boats that came every 2 or 3 weeks to bring you an occasional steak or a pound of butter. Otherwise, you ate the chicken that lost in the cockfight. There was no telephone. The telegraph service was crude. Cables took forever, so that people wrote letters, and letter writing was a leisurely occupation because a letter was something over a month in transit going over, and another month in transit coming back, and people didn't answer immediately, so that it's typically about a 3-month cycle between the time that you wrote a letter to the time that you got a reply. In the meantime, there were American magazines, and in the provinces, once in a blue moon, there would be a traveling American movie. But the Americans that were in the provincial Americans were a very sociable crowd, and Uh, they developed the art of conversation to a very fine art. There was great yarn telling, great reminiscing. And in the evenings particularly, people would just sit and tell stories, invent stories, play games, and get up and go to work again tomorrow morning. Well, let me give you the typical thing that happened, which was that the town would say, we need a school. If you'll provide the teacher, we'll provide the ground, the materials, and the labor. Bring us a school. The demand was far greater than the supply, and the classes were tremendously big. Later on, when I was in the 6th grade, I was in a class of 60 boys, one class. That wasn't unusual. There were some classes that were as big as 100, with an attendance of about 50%, so that it was not at all unusual to have a teacher herding 50 kids through in a foreign language, so that there was a great deal of give and take on both sides. That was rather difficult because my father was a very hot-tempered man. And I remembered a number of years later, we met one of his ex-pupils on the street, and people said, "Oh, Mr. Netzorg, I'm so glad to see you. Do you still break the chalk?" When he got angry, he'd just break it up into little pieces and try to control himself. But no, the feeling was that in that day that a teacher was a big person. He was the one that was, he was the official bringer of civilization. And that's still the way it is in many parts of the Philippines. The teacher lives in a goldfish bowl because he's required to set standards of conduct, deportment, morality, intellect, the whole gamut of everything. The teacher is the marriage counselor, whatever. From time to time, my mother would be called upon to act as a midwife, for instance. She could set a broken bone, all learned through having to do it. And there was a very small American community there, maybe at most a dozen people, a considerable Spanish community, which has since dwindled, but it was also a very rewarding life because the results were visible from day to day.